Grand Seiko they've been an interesting one recently, especially with the release of the new Tourbillon, for example, Watches and Wonders, and it got me wondering, what are they up to? Today we have two very exciting Grand Seiko models. We have the new Flow of the Season Grand Seikos, and we have the spring and the summer. The spring is the light frosted blue and the summer is the dark green. These pieces are actually exclusive to Chisholm Hunter for the time being, and there's a lot of points to talk about. And let's discuss what Grand Seiko are up to. Welcome back to Time on the Wrist at Chisholm Hunter. My name is Harrison, as always, and before we get into the specs, let's talk a little bit about the question that I asked in the title. And let's reference this to fashion, okay? And I'll talk about this a bit later once we've covered the specs, but let's just leave this thought with you. Do you remember the first mobile phones that came out? They were massive. And then, over the years, the phones got smaller and smaller and smaller. And then for some reason, they went the opposite direction. They got bigger and bigger and bigger. And now they're working their way back down. And I think this trend is repeating itself. But enough of my rambling, let's begin with the specs of these bad boys. So we're gonna begin with the spring version here because it's my favorite version. That pale blue is absolutely stunning. Let's talk about the case diameter. The case diameter on all of these models comes in at 37.3 millimeters in diameter. So it's a very small watch, it's an elegant watch, and Grand Seiko are kind of known for their elegant watches. I mean, I have a Grand Seiko American exclusive, which is the definition of elegant dress watch, and I love it. But this pretty much is a smaller, more compact version of that watch. And we'll talk about why towards the end. The case thickness of this model comes in at, according to Grand Seiko's website, 11.7, but to us, it comes in at 11.7 as well. So Grand Seiko's website is right. Whoa. We actually have a really exciting announcement. We need to pause the video. We are giving you the chance to win one of 3 Tissot goodie bags, which are all cycling orientated, hence why I'm dressed like this. All you need to do is subscribe to the channel and comment with your favorite Tissot model. 3, 2, 1. Go. I actually personally prefer slimmer watches, just a little bit like this one, and the reason I like slimmer watches is because they're less likely to get knocked about and dented and scratched. In my lifestyle, I do tend to do that. So if it is a dressy watch that you're going for, like a Grand Seiko, the slimmer, in my opinion, the slimmer the better. It makes it more dressy, it sits nicely under a shirt cuff. It's a nice dress watch. Adding to that dressy feel is the case length, which comes in at 44.3 millimeters, and then also the case material, which is of course stainless steel. But the thing that makes it more dressy is that it's actually polished stainless steel. Now, polished stainless steel kind of scratches easier than brushed, or it shows scratches easier than brushed. But the thing is, if you're getting a dress watch, the odds are you're not going to be wearing it out and about and getting it knocked up and scratched. A dress watch is kind of a watch that you invest in after you have your first sports watch. I think that you would go for your sports watch first, and that'll be your everyday wearer, and then you would go for a dressy watch after that, which you can enjoy. I mean, my Grand Seiko sitting at home, I put it on special occasions, and that's the kind of watch that this is. You'd save it for special occasions. To add to that, this model also features Zaratsu polishing, which reflects the light beautifully. This is partially one of the reasons why I bought my Grand Seiko sitting at home. It is stunning. These are handcrafted in Japan, and it catches even the faintest lights on those hands and the indices and actually make it that little bit easier to read. I'm a huge fan of Zaratsu polishing, and actually I don't know of any other brand that does it. The straps on both of these models are actually alligator straps. Now, the blue model, the spring model that I have in my hand, has a blue alligator strap with kind of a matte finish. And then when you go to the green model, it actually has more of a polished finish with a green strap. Now, I'm not gonna lie, guys, I probably couldn't pull these off. But what I could pull off is the bracelet, because I actually bought one. And I think that these should have came in bracelets. I love Grand Seiko bracelets. I love that Zaratsu finishing that they add to the bracelet. I love the clasps, the deployant clasps on the bracelet. I'm just more of a fan of the bracelet than the leather. With that said, this leather strap gives this watch and these watches a more vintage feel. It kind of throws you back to a point in time where they used leather straps. I actually remember seeing one of my dad's first watches when he was very, very young, and it had a leather strap because that's what they used back in the day, and it kind of feeds back into that argument of fashion repeating itself. The weight of this model comes in, bearing in mind this is on the leather strap, so it's really just the head of the watch that we're weighing, comes in at 60 grams. Grand Seiko's website says it's 61, so let's call it 60.5. Crown is quite short, quite stubby, but it's very easy to turn. And one thing that I do notice, because this watch is a manual wind, the crown actually gives you noise when you're winding it. It's quite nice. You feel a connection with your watch. I mean, you're powering the heart of your watch. You're giving your watch fuel. You're giving it petrol. Listen to this. Listen to this. That is the noise of the crown winding. It's a nice thought. It's a nice feeling. The bezel on this watch is very, very limited, but on smaller watch faces, that's actually a good thing. And let me explain why it's a good thing. When you have a smaller watch face, you have less dial real estate, so to speak. You have less watch face to look at. So when they make the bezel that little bit limited, you have more watch face and in essence can see it that little bit more clearly. That's why on bigger watches, sports models in particular, they have quite a thick bezel. But when the watch shrinks down, they use more of a limited bezel, so you have more face to look at so that it's easier to read. It's a long way of saying it's easier to read. Before we move on to the dial, it's a beautiful dial, by the way, but let's talk about that boxed shape sapphire crystal. So it actually sports quite a raised boxed shape sapphire crystal glass on the front of this case, and it has anti-reflective coating on the underbelly, but not on the outside. Now I know there's quite a lot of people out there that don't like anti-reflective coating on the outside because it's that little bit more likely to scratch. And it's good because it's boxed shape, meaning it's a little bit more raised, it is a little bit more likely to get caught. So I like the fact that they've not used AR coating here. And the last thing that we'll talk about before we move on to that dial is the splash resistance. This watch is not water resistant, it is splash resistant. So you can take it in the rain, but please do not wear this into the sea because it would break my heart. And now we will move on to both of these beautiful faces. But before we do that, if you could subscribe, it would be much appreciated. We're actually almost at 10,000 subscribers. That is incredible. So thank you guys so much. I'll give you guys 5 seconds just to hit that subscribe button. There we go. The spring edition, which is that baby beautiful blue, reflects the brightening of the blue skies from the end of spring to the beginning of summer, as nature reawakens outside the Japan studio and becomes more active. The summer edition, which is that dark green color, reflects the leaves turning dark green at the end of the Japanese summertime, and the light breeze signaling that autumn is on the way. And that is the story behind each of these colors and behind each of these dials. But what is more than the colors is the textures. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that Grand Seiko produce some of the most incredibly textured dials in the world. Their art form is unbelievable. It's handcrafted genius in my opinion. That's why I've actually got the American exclusive sitting at home. But if you look at the dial on this one, you can see that it's actually sandblasted. And depending on the way you look at it, it reflects the light in different ways, looking a different shade of blue. When it's in the dark, it obviously looks that darker, more matte feel. Whereas when it's in the light, it looks a little bit more reflective. Then we get to the hands and the indices. Now the hands and the indices are beautiful. They are Grand Seiko's highly polished hands and indices that reflect the light really, really nicely and are really sharply polished. They look prominent and pronounced, and they're actually raised off of the dial, which gives it that extra layer of depth. Same with the GSS logo, the Grand Seiko logo, which is below the 12 o'clock mark. It is slightly raised. The dial itself is actually very clean. There's really nothing on it apart from the Grand Seiko logo and the hands and the indices, which I'm a big fan of. You don't see that nowadays. You kind of see busy dials. People kind of over-brand things. But Grand Seiko have just gone for something simplistic. Now, we obviously know that this Grand Seiko, or these Grand Seiko models, are manual wind, and the movement on them is pretty special. And I think there's a reason why they've gone with a manual wind movement as well. And we'll touch on that in a second, but before we do, Chisholm Hunter are actually authorized retailers for Grand Seiko watches, so if you want to shop these exclusive models to Chisholm Hunter, make sure you click the link below. The movement in this model is a manual winding movement, and it's the caliber 9S64. Its accuracy is -3 to +5 seconds a day, and it has a 72 our power reserve. You know, there's something quite beautiful about being able to see properly into your movement. A manual wind movement, you don't have that rotor blocking or obstructing your view into the movement. And it gives you a closer connection to your watch. I mean, you need to wind your watch every 3 days. And you get into a rhythm, you get into a pattern, and it becomes a sentimental thing because you do it every couple of days. And then you end up not wearing your watch and you feel weird without it. It's almost like changing your car. You need to learn how to drive a new car. It's scary. You don't want to do that. You want that comfort. You want that warmth. And that's what this watch is. It's kind of a sentimental throwback, if you will. And let's talk about what Grand Seiko are really up to. There has been a common theme in this video, and I'm not sure if you've noticed it. For example, let's look at the case diameter. 37.3 millimeters. It's quite small. Let's look at the leather strap. It's not old-fashioned, but it's not exactly new. I mean, people are going with bracelets, ceramic, gold, but they've opted with leather. And then you get to the manual wind movement. Everything about this watch screams vintage. Now, when you look at vintage watches as a whole, they kind of fit this bill, they fit this shape, but this is a modern incarnation of a vintage watch. Then when we look at the watch industry as a whole, we can see the same theme. We can see people following that trend, if you will. Let's look at the Tudor Blancpain Pro. It came out and it's 39 millimeters. They could have gone for 41, they could have gone for 42, but instead they opted for something smaller, which is interesting. And I think Grand Seiko is going the same direction, and so is the rest of the industry. It's something that I've noticed across the industry is people are going for smaller watches and more vintage looking pieces. But what do you guys think? Thank you so much for watching this episode of Time and the Wrist with these Chisholm Hunter exclusive models. If you have enjoyed, please hit that subscribe button. We're almost at 10K, which is absolutely phenomenal. Actually, by the time we post this video, we might have hit it. If we haven't, then I'd appreciate it even more than if we were at 9K or 10K. Oh, you guys know what I mean. I'll see you later.